Honestly, it took me over a decade of the workforce to realize this, but to be successful as an entrepreneur, you can't be a perfectionist. You really have to focus on imperfect action because that always trumps perfection. Just remember, when you're really trying to grow and scale in real estate, the key is to do consistent day in and day out action and just fix it along the way. And then a year, 2 years later, you're going to have a perfect process, but it took many iterations along the way.
Welcome to the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Axel Ragnarsson, and on this show, I dissect how seasoned multifamily investors started, built, and scaled their businesses. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. In this episode, I'm speaking with Andrew Freed, who is a real estate investor based in Worcester, Massachusetts. And Andrew's got a very relatable story as it relates to how he got into the real estate investing game and how he's rapidly grown his portfolio. And I think it's one that's going to resonate with a lot of the listeners out there that are more organically building their real estate business, their real estate portfolio. And in this episode, we touch on how Andrew turned equity in his one-bedroom condo outside of Boston into a large portfolio of rental properties, and how he was systematically able to continue leveraging equity in all of the properties that he was buying to continue buying and buying more assets. We also talk about how he jumped into syndications, made a pretty big leap into taking down his first syndicated deal. And we touch on a whole bunch of other topics as well, such as the importance of getting active at your local meetups, getting active on social, how he's built his infrastructure to self-manage his portfolio that he owns himself. And we also talk about really just the importance of delegation as you're growing your portfolio. So a whole bunch of different topics in terms of what we discuss in this episode. But I think this is going to be an episode that resonates with a lot of you out there because of how relatable Andrew's story is and how similar his journey is, I think, to a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast. So if you did enjoy this episode, please consider leaving the show a rating and a review. We recently crossed the 250 review threshold, which is incredible. And next goal is we got to get up over 300. Getting up over 300 is going to put us really in the upper echelon of all of the real estate podcasts out there, whether it's multifamily focused or not. So really big milestone for us. So if you've enjoyed the episode or enjoyed the podcast in general, please consider leaving the show a rating and a review. But thanks again for listening to the podcast, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Joining me this week is Andrew Freed. How are we doing, Andrew?
I am fantastic. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Looking forward to our conversation and appreciate you taking time during what's typically a pretty slow week for everyone. Although I guess for those that are kind of doing deals, it's a busy week. Alternatively, speaking to some of the business who kind of takes this last week of December off. But glad we're chatting. Look forward to getting into your story and diving into how you've built a sizable real estate business so quickly. But why don't we back up however long you'd like to back up and start with your story, maybe what you were doing as you got into real estate, before you started investing, and what your business looks like now.
Great question. So it all started back, when I graduated college. I did the normal American dream of, going to a good school, getting a master's, getting a job at a good company, making six figures, getting a nice swanky condo in a city, right? And by all accounts, a decade later, I made it. I hit the American dream. And then COVID came, and I came to the realization that I may, make six figures. I may have this condo, but at the end of the day, I'm paycheck to paycheck. Maybe I have 6 months, 12 months of reserve, but I got to go crawling back to that job. And that scared the hell out of me, to be honest with you. And I really had to change the status quo. So I decided to take a risk and to go for it. And, worst case, if I fail, just go back to work for 30, 40 more years and retire like everybody else. So that's exactly what I did. About 80% of my net worth was tied up in that one-bedroom condo I bought about 5 years ago. So at that point, I took out a $200K HELOC home line of credit, and I used that money to start scaling my portfolio. So I closed on a couple house hacks. I bought some investment properties once I started joint venturing on some 5-6 plexes with 2-3 people. And then when I ran out of my own money, that's when I really decided to start raising money for larger deals. So I syndicated 60 some odd unit portfolio in New Bedford, as well as a 32 unit in Lancaster, South Carolina. And I did that in a matter of 3 years. So that's kind of my journey. And I have about 125 units today.
No, love it. That's great. And just for everybody who's listening, for context purposes, this condo is in Boston, right? In terms of where you were living and where you started this whole journey.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It was in Dorchester, which is known as
Gotcha.
one of the worst parts of Boston. But what I ended up doing was I bought in the path of progress. So I actually bought in Upham's Corner, which is right next to Southie, and that appreciation spilled over, in the time that I lived there, and my condo essentially doubled in value.
Hmm.
So that's a really good strategy for investors. Is like looking like where is all the development happening? Where are all the permits being pulled? And maybe like if you have a long-term vision, maybe buying in that area of the path of progress.
Yeah, hey man. I lived in Dorchester for a couple of years, right in that neck of the woods. It's funny. My mom grew up in northern Massachusetts, and 30, 40 years ago, Dorchester was actually a lot rougher than it is now. But so when she found out I was moving there, she was like, "Really? Are you sure?" But it's actually not a bad part of town now. You got to go pretty deep before it gets rough. But yeah, in the last 5 years, I mean, well, if you bought a condo in Dorchester 5 years ago, regardless of where it was, you're doing pretty well 5 years later.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned you took out a home equity line of credit on that property, and then you
Okay.
mentioned you did a couple of house hacks. So did you personally move into some small multifamily and start bouncing around, or did you just immediately start buying purely investment properties?
You're exactly correct. I actually moved into the property in Worcester, Massachusetts. I moved about 45 minutes west of Boston where I had no friends. I knew nobody. But what I did know is I liked the property out there. I liked the market. I knew it was a fantastic place to live. It was a growing market. I think in the last 5 years, last 7 years, their population increased by about 50%. So really, very quick growing market. And what I did was I took a 40K out from my line of credit and used that combined with an FHA loan for my first house hack at 151 Ingleside Avenue. I ended up buying that for like 560,000, which honestly, like I was frightened for my first house. Like I was like scared out of my mind, and primarily because like I was buying like $60,000 higher than any comp in the area.
Oh wow!
But it
Is
was
this a
just
two,
turned.
three, 4 unit type of
It,
property?
it was a 3 unit.
Gotcha.
But the owner was a contractor, so this property was absolutely mint. Like it's the nicest property I have. All I need to do is a couple of cosmetic upgrades, but other than that, the house is as turnkey as you get. But the real reason why I did close on that was because two of the units rented gave me about 3,200 in rent, and the mortgage was 3,200. So I was essentially living for free. So it was kind of a no brainer for me. And then now the property's worth about 700, so it appreciated really well. But the key about house hacking, which I highly recommend to most people, is before if you go in with a low down payment loan, maybe an FHA, 3.5% down or 5% down, before you leave that property, make sure you open up a home line of credit as your primary residence. Because when it's your primary residence, you can go up to 100% of a HELOC, right? So
Hmm.
prior to me leaving that house hack, I actually opened up a $75,000 line of credit to purchase more property, right? So more or less, I pretty much brought none of my money to own 6 units. I brought 40K from my HELOC, which wasn't out of my own bank. Then when I left the three family, I took another 75K HELOC and used that as a down payment on the three family. So it's like I essentially got like 6 units for like no money out of my pocket, which was really good.
Yeah, it's the power of just getting that snowball started going down the hill, right? You just want to send it in the right direction, and then if you buy right in good areas that are growing, and you're in a position where you're not jeopardizing your capital by buying a property that needs a ton of construction, and then therefore you start going over budget and you start blowing through your budget, or you start buying in an area that maybe you don't know that well and you can't manage that well in. Um, when you stack the good decisions and then you just give it some time, then you're in a position to start pulling all of your equity from these different properties. I mean, that's how I got going. It was the same exact story, right? Is just stacking a lot of these deals on top of each other that all make sense. And maybe you're not knocking the ball out of the park with some large deal right away, but you're just putting yourself in a position to where you're building a great foundation. So along the same line of thinking, right? So you bought a couple of three or smaller multifamily. You're using some HELOCs, maybe some of your own cash. You mentioned that at some point you made a small little leap there as it relates to deal size, and I believe you mentioned you bought a couple of 6 unit properties. Correct me if I misremember that, but you jumped up a little in size, and I believe you mentioned you did some joint ventures to buy those deals. Can you talk about maybe the first one you did there? What was the thought process, kind of the structure around the joint venture, and how that started setting you down the path of growing a little bit more quickly?
So that HELOC paid me dividends in many ways. And I actually took $65,000 from that HELOC and threw it into syndication as a limited partner, 132 unit building in Lowell, Massachusetts. A year later, that syndication was sold and I got an 89% return on that syndication. So I ended up sorry, were you going to say?
I was just going to say, what year was this, right? I'm giving everyone context from a timeline standpoint. What year did you invest in that syndication?
I invested in that syndication in 2021 and it sold in 2022. About a year later, so like literally to the day, so it incurred long-term capital gains. And I took all that money, and at that exact moment, a 5-unit came right in the MLS. It was a 5-unit in Worcester. I think it was listed for $650,000. When 3 families sell for $600,000, market rent, pro forma rent on the property was around $8,800. So it made per month. So it made sense all day. So I ended up taking that money, but I realized I didn't have enough money for a 25% down payment. So I thought, like, who in my network would be a great partner and likes doing things that I don't like doing? Like, I don't like communicating with the tenants. I don't like dealing with all the fixes. I'm more of like a back office guy, like doing all the leases, making sure the payments are in place, like doing the books, right? And then my partner, the person that came to mind was this guy named Zach Bray that I met at all these meetups. So I called him initially. I'm like, hey, would you be interested in this deal? I told him a little about it. He's like, hell yeah, I'm so down. So at that point, we walked the property within 1 day of it being on the MLS. And within 2 days of it being on the MLS, we offered list price with inspection information only. We got it under contract within like 2 days. So it was a great deal. And when we bought the property, I think the current rents in place were like $3,600. As of today, current rents are $8,800 a year later. It's worth about $950,000. So, and then just going back to that, buying, using equity from property to buy more property. Me and my partner are actually opening up a second, they call it a bank check line of credit, which is a second lien on your commercial property. And our bank is allowing us to take out about $150,000 in a line of credit from that property, which we're going to use to buy more property.
Love it. Is that a small local bank, local credit union type of lender?
Yep. It's GFA, which they are fantastic, work with a lot of investors. And they're actually giving us the second lien because they have the first lien. So it's a little more safer to them.
Yeah, exactly. They're aware of the project. They've been involved with it for a longer period of time. They understand all of the metrics around it. We've done something similar on a couple of deals we own up in New Hampshire. So from a partnership structure standpoint, because I think that's going to be helpful for the folks listening, right? A lot of people listening are like, I got some money. I ran across a deal that's maybe a little larger than what I've done in the past, requires a little bit more cash than maybe I have, but I got a friend or a family member or someone that's got a couple bucks, or another investor I know. Did you guys just contribute capital and then split up the equity dependent on the capital that you contributed? How did you guys divvy up roles, responsibilities? Are you both involved in the management? Is that just you? How did you go about actually putting the deal together?
Great question. So when it comes to partnerships, I very much feel you have to acclimate to partnerships, and that's exactly what I did. With this particular partnership, it was just a straight 50-50 split. We split up responsibilities 50-50, we brought 50% of the cash, right? But it all goes back to like what you bring to the table. Like he brought a lot to the table in the form of dealing with repair and maintenance, or in the form of dealing with CapEx, in the form of dealing with the tenants, right? However, if I had, but later on in my investing career, I ran across other partners that maybe they only brought capital, right? And at that point, if they're only bringing capital, and me and my partners are operating the deal, we might take a little bit more of the equity for putting the sweat equity into it, right? Mm-hmm. So it all depends on the stages, but when I started partnerships, I very much did just straight equity split, and I partnered with experienced people who brought something to the table. And as I grew, I started partnering with people like a little less experienced. Maybe I'm taking a little bit of the equity for doing more of the work. Yeah,
no, that makes sense. I think, it's the easiest way to do it, right? I think it's especially when you're doing the first couple, it's like, if you need $100,000 to do the project, you're both throwing 50 and you split it up 50-50, great. And then this is just me speaking to the listeners here, not necessarily to you, but if somebody finds a deal and is more responsible for finding the deal, let's say it's direct to seller off market, take a little bit of a fee to compensate you for that work at closing, and then you go ahead and split it, right? So you're getting compensated for being the deal finder. Or if somebody's doing the management and they're exclusively responsible for all of the property management, have that person take a little bit of a property management fee, so they're compensated a little bit, right? And therefore, you're divvying up the roles and at least assigning dollar amounts to the different contributions outside of just the capital you're contributing as well. So just another spin on that. But I totally agree that That's just the best way to approach it, especially on a smaller deal where maybe you just have one partner or a couple of partners and you want to keep it pretty simplified. So let's fast forward a little bit after that. You mentioned some point you did a 60, did you say 65 units? Correct me if I'm misremembering, syndication in New Bedford, Mass. So that's a big jump, right? You went from a couple of threes, couple of sixes, some smaller deals. You're slowly growing your portfolio, using your own dough to do so. A couple of partnerships, bang, 65 unit syndication. Walk us through how that came to be.
So my real growth, like I had different stages in my growth. Like my first 0 to 10 units, I did myself. It took me a very long time to do it. Did about, a year and a half, right? And then from there, I went from, 10 to 24 with kind of just through developing partnerships at meetups, developing relationships with other intermediate level investors and JVing there. And then from 24 to 124, I really utilized the concept of a mastermind where I took a bunch of local investors, right? We met weekly when we went over our goals, our highs and our lows, our goal this week and our goals next week, right? And when we did that, we all brought deals to the table, right? And that's exactly what happened is somebody in my mastermind did a direct mailer to an estate in New Bedford. And he found this fantastic deal. It was about, my purchase price was around $5.5 million. He didn't have the money to take it down. He didn't have the resources to raise the capital. At that point, I just got off, my podcast just came out for Bigger Pockets. So me and my partner felt like we had the ability to raise the capital, which we ran into challenges later with that. But that was
always do on the first one. Yes. It never goes according to plan. Yeah.
Nope. And we had to bring in another partner to raise the remaining capital. But nonetheless, we closed that deal. Right. So we ended up getting that deal through a local mastermind. And I ended up getting another 30 some odd units through that same exact mastermind.
Love it. Is that one that you started, joined? Is it like a local one?
So I'm part of many masterminds. I'm part of GoBundance, which is like a nationwide mastermind, very effective group. But I personally also like to create local masterminds with local investors at my level, right? So back then, my level was, 10, 20 units, right? So I had 5 or 6 people, all 10, 20 units, right? And we closed about 100 units in that deal. Like at that point, that mastermind kind of fizzled off at that point. So I ended up creating a new mastermind in the past couple of weeks where each is about 4 of us and each of us has 100 plus units, right? So, I'm expecting that all of us are going to contribute and help each other grow. But it's been a really powerful concept in having me scale quickly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first couple of, I'll define larger deals that I did were done with partners that I also met in, paid groups, mastermind groups. The first 44 units we bought in Florida, which was like the first time we left New England. And that was the first time I was really going out there and raising capital, was through partners that I met in a group like that. I think if your goal is to grow a little bit more quickly as a real estate investor, joining one of these groups, really any group with like-minded individuals that are rowing in the same direction as you, is one of the most critical things you can do. Especially if you're looking to grow and buy slightly larger deals. Let's just say 50 plus unit deals, right? $5-6 million plus deals, because those deals are typically done through collaboration, through some kind of joint ventures, or through a formal syndication. And oftentimes when you're syndicating a deal, there's a couple of active partners involved that are owning different parts of that process. It's very hard to do that on your own. Not that it can't be done, but you can shortcut that path. So I think that's great. So you mentioned, capital raise was a little bit challenging. You brought someone in to help with that. It's always challenging, the first syndication. I think everybody always thinks they can raise a little bit more than they can, right? I think we're all pretty optimistic. And then you find out in the process that, this is actually kind of tough. People say they're interested, and then when it comes to wire the money, maybe they don't. What were some other closed you faced or things that you learned, some big takeaways in working through the process of going from, hey, we got this deal, to closed syndication, closed transaction? What were some of the other things that you took away as big learning lessons?
I would say one of the biggest learning lessons I learned when it came to a syndication is it's almost a different beast than these smaller JV deals, because more or less you have to physically write a business plan, right? And then you're essentially raising capital for this pseudo business in the form of this asset, right? So it's it requires so much more work on that front, from creating the business plan to doing the slide deck, to communicating with investors, to having an investor relations group, to keeping the investors informed, right? It provides a whole new variety of items you have to do to close the deal. And that was just surprising to me. And honestly, it was a lot more work than I anticipated. It was probably about 5 to 10 times more work than a JV deal, like a 5 or 6 plex. It was a lot of work.
100%. 100% it is. There's a
Yeah.
sheer volume of work that comes with raising capital to do deals from passive investors, both during the contract period, as you mentioned, right? Prepping the deck, having those investor calls, doing all the legal docs for the offering, staying compliant through that whole process, coordinating all of the funds being wired
Yep.
into that's just herding cats, right? It's like, especially if you have a high volume of high volume of investors that are writing smaller checks. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, post close, right? There's just a lot more work, sending the investor updates, and it's not the same as doing your own deals at all. And I think a lot of folks don't really realize that. They just like the idea of, oh, we'll raise some money, we'll go buy bigger stuff. There's more money to be made. Well, there can be, but it comes with a significant amount of work tied to that as well, and much more responsibility and stress ultimately,
Yeah.
than
Yeah. I mean,
just putting your own dough at work.
yeah, I mean, and to your point, I mean, up in New England, there's really not that many larger properties, right? So if you're buying
Yeah.
a large quantity of properties, a lot of time you're buying them in a portfolio fashion, right? Like maybe like 10, 12 properties, like ranging from 4 to 8 plexes. And I mean, that's great. And it's great in the fact that like you can sell them off one by one and get top dollar from retail investors. But the downside is it requires way more work to stabilize it than one actual building in one location with one roof, all the same systems in one place. And the other challenge I ran across was just not anticipating the sheer amount of work associated with a portfolio versus kind of a one building asset type syndication.
Yeah, scattered site portfolios are just, a lot more work, right? I mean, we own our management company, and when we do larger deals, as you mentioned, that's primarily what they are, is the investor that's 65, 70, 75, that's like cashing in on all the property I bought over the last 30 years. Here's my 40 unit portfolio, 10 buildings on average that are 4 units in size or whatever it is. And yeah, you might be taking down 40 units in one whack, but you're not getting the economies of scale of owning a 40 unit asset that's not even remotely the same. Um, Especially in New England, where every building was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they're more management intensive to begin with.
Totally.
But let's talk about how you're managing all of these. Are you self-managing the entire portfolio? Do you do a mixture of self-management, third party? What does that look like?
I do a mixture. So I self-manage all the units I have like direct ownership in, like the ones that I own personally or I JV. I self-manage those. And the way I do that is I actually have a 18-year-old kid. We pay him like $15 an hour and we incentivize him. Like every time he gets a listing done, we give him like $500. Every time he finds a deal, we give him $1,000. And he does all the tenant communications. He deals with all the contractors. He'll meet the tenants at site to pick up rent. So he does all of that. And then combined with that, we have like an electronic Rolodex of our preferred vendors, right? So he simply just goes to our preferred vendors, goes down the list, hires them out, and manages all that kind of communication for us, which saves us a ton of time. And combined with that, I have a couple virtual assistants. So I have somebody that does all the bookkeeping, right? I have somebody that does my social media. I have somebody that does, my executive assistant that might help me with, skip tracing or off-market leads or things like that, right? So I have a whole slew of kind of a team that helps me manage the portfolio that I manage. And then the units that I syndicated or I joint ventured, the larger buildings, we have third-party managers that do that.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. Sounds like your guy here, Mr. Young 18-year-old is just drinking from a fire hose. That dude's learning real estate on as quickly as anyone probably has with everything that you got him doing. But I think that's a great alternative solution because I think for a lot of folks that are between zero, call it 25 units, which is an arbitrary number I'm just saying right now, probably on the fence of, do I continue to self-manage? Do I want to go and bring this to somebody who can manage this for me, some kind of third-party management company? But maybe they haven't really pulled all of the strings as it relates to systematizing it if they are going to self-manage. Because I think a lot of folks self-manage, but they don't necessarily do so in such a way that they're thinking about building the right systems and processes, right? Using the right tech, maybe hiring some folks, whether it's a VA or whether it's somebody part-time or whether it's just some vendors that can do a lot in terms of helping out. And they're not necessarily doing everything they can do to maybe make an educated decision on that front. And you've clearly done that, right? As it relates to building the infrastructure that allows you to self-manage a little bit more on autopilot. But talk about Talk about joining some local investor associations, landlord associations. I know you've leveraged those groups for some economic benefits. Touch on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So when I got into real estate investing, I was very much looking for a mentor. And I ended up finding my mentor, John Bombachi. He hosts a bunch of these real estate groups all over Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And this was back when I had like 6 units. I attended one of his virtual meetups, and he asked, I'm looking for a venue in Worcester. Does anybody know any good venues there? And that's my market. So that weekend, I actually went up to like 5 or 6 venues. I took video, I got pricing, I got the manager's information. I put in a nice, sexy Google Drive. I sent it to him. He was like, wow, this is fantastic. I've been asking somebody to do this for 8 months. Nobody's done it. Like, do you want to like be our first guest at our meetup? And from there, that kind of developed into me hosting that meetup, and me becoming an agent on his team, and me joining that community. So that's kind of how I started the meetup. And that's why I've met most of my partners at these meetups, which have been extremely valuable. Combined with that, I also am part of local landlord associations, which fantastic organizations to be part of. But one of the amazing benefits I like about these organizations, which I highly recommend to most landlords, is a lot of them have huge Home Depot or Lowe's discount programs where you can literally get like 15, 20, 25% off because you're utilizing their account, which has the buying power of thousands of landlords, right? So I've actually utilized those benefits. I think my yearly fee for the landlord association is maybe like $100. Like literally in one purchase, I'll save 3x that. So that's helped me a ton, and that's what I highly recommend for new investors is take advantage of those programs. They're very useful.
Yeah, no, that's a nice little pro tip. I know that a lot of the ones in New Hampshire, which I will confess that I don't go to as many as I should, or at least as I used to. It's just, there is all kinds of benefits to going, and I've just started to slack and focus on other stuff, mostly, networking through mediums such as this. But in-person networking, in-person meetups is truly one of the best ways to accelerate how quickly you're growing your business, because those are all of the people that are doing the deals, right? And it helps you find the partners, which is really a key ingredient to scaling. Helps you find all the key vendors that you should be working with, the insurance brokers, the lenders, whether it's local banks, credit unions, reps from those banks, whether it's private money lenders or hard money lenders. Helps you find all the brokers that are probably the most active, the wholesalers. Like that's just, you go to a few meetups and you start to build out your team and your base. And that's what actually, individuals in the right seats that you have access to are really what drive a lot of the growth in a real estate investor's business. So I love that. And then, as you mentioned, right, if you can take any kind of leadership position or be more forward facing at these groups, speak at them, co-host them, do something else to get your face kind of on the presentation up at the front, or you just have the mic more, even better, because you're building some authority there, which is critical. So I want to talk about some of your other keys to scaling, right? We talked about where you were accessing funds, some HELOCs, some second position mortgages, your JVing, did a syndication, leveraging other people's capital, and then leveraging the bank's capital in a unique way. What are some of your other keys to why you've scaled so quickly?
One of the keys to me scaling so quickly has been creating a niche and creating a brand and being out there on social media. So I very much established myself as a subject matter expert, as kind of the Worcester multifamily guy, in the fact that I'm an investor-focused agent. I have agents under me who specifically focus on multifamily in Worcester. I host the largest real estate meetup in Worcester. I've been doing it for about 3 years. I'm also very active on Bigger Pockets. I was on the Bigger Pockets podcast. I've been on many podcasts. But in addition to that, I'm extremely active on social media. And I think a lot of people discount the power of social media in regards to lead generation from a deal standpoint, as well as a capital raise standpoint. And I've gotten a lot of my deals from social media. I believe my last 4 deals all came from people knowing I buy multifamily and bringing me deals.
What medium, real quick, I'm interrupting you, but what platform are you active on?
I'm active on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn are primarily my social media platforms. I am trying to expand into YouTube. YouTube's, I think, the largest search engine in the world. So I am trying to expand there. That's one of my 2024 goals. But yes, it's been extremely helpful in me finding partners, finding capital, and finding deals. And that's where I focus a lot of my time.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, in reality, when you really break it down, like if you just break it down to the most fundamental level. What are we trying to accomplish as real estate investors in terms of finding deals and finding money? We just need to be top of mind. The higher the volume of people that are thinking of you, the better, right? And it's just when people think about, oh, I have this deal in this area, or oh, I'm looking for a partner in this area for this type of property, or I'm looking to invest alongside somebody, I'm looking to passively invest. Like, you just need to be at the top of everybody's list in terms of who they think of. And social media is the most scalable way of doing that. Obviously, I'm very active on social as well, and I believe in that being an unbelievable use of your time as an investor, is telling your story online, telling everybody what you're doing, sharing what you're doing, documenting what you're doing, because that's how you do that at scale, right? The only other way to really do that is to do it on a one-to-one basis, which is also really important to do. Go out there and get coffee with the people that are important, or just call them up and stay in touch over direct emails, phone calls, text, all that. But it is really easy to do that if you have a bit of a following of people that are that overlap with what you're doing quite significantly. So I think that's a great strategy. You've also talked about delegation as a key to scaling as well, and systematically delegating tasks or work that's falling beneath your dollar per hour, outside of where you should be spending your time. Talk about how you've done that as you started getting busier and growing your portfolio.
So when I first started, I did all my deals on my own. I was very much a one-man army. I was doing bookkeeping. I was doing social media. I was dealing with all the lenders. I was dealing with all the contractors, right? At a certain point, it was just too much. At a certain point, I came to the realization that I need to start delegating some of these tasks, especially the tasks that take energy away from me, right? So I first started with bookkeeping. At that point, it wasn't really worth my time to do bookkeeping. I pay somebody in the Philippines $5 an hour to do the bookkeeping. Meanwhile, my dollar per hour task back then, I probably make $100 an hour for what I was doing, right? So I first subbed out bookkeeping, right? And then at that point, I realized what's taking up a lot of my time and taking up a lot of my energy. And I realized it was a lot with tenant communication, had to do with coordinating contractors and things like that. So at that point, me and my partner decided to hire that 18-year-old kid to take some of that stuff off of our plate, right? And then as I slowly progressed through my real estate investing career, I slowly worked my way down the items that took energy away from me that really wasn't worth my time. I started delegating that. And now and today, I really focus on the tasks. I work on the tasks that really are worth my time and really push the business forward, like making offers, walking properties, talking with brokers, underwriting deals, talking with investors. Like, these are high dollar per hour tasks I simply really can't delegate very effectively.
Yeah, if it's deals and money, man, that's the game we're in, right? You got to be finding deals, you got to be finding dough. Everything outside of that is just, it's commoditized. It's easily outsourced, whether it's to somebody internally in your own business or to a vendor, right? We have a bookkeeping firm that does that handles all of our books. Property management companies, hiring a mortgage broker to help you with your debt, right? When you're going through the transaction process. And the reality is, oftentimes, there are a lot of individuals that do all of these different specific tasks or own these specific components of your business, and they'll do a better job at it than you will, right? If you work with a quality vendor. So not only are you freeing yourself up to focus on the stuff that moves the needle, but you might actually be working with people that are more capable of accomplishing that task than you are, which I think is a big mindset shift too. I remember, and I tell this I've told this story on the podcast a few times. Like, I self-managed up till 10 units, and I hated managing my own property, right? For me, it wasn't even a matter of systematizing it a little bit better. I was like, I just live an hour, 45 minutes away for all the properties I own. I'm just not meeting the carpet guy at 7:30 on a Wednesday night anymore. I can't do that. And I remember just hiring a third-party management company and thinking that they were making way too much money, and thinking that I was overpaying them, and thinking that was, I was going to be taking 2 steps back because my cash flow was going to go down. And I realized, just even simply, that outside of anything financial, I was just a lot more enthusiastic about continuing to invest in real estate, because the part of it that I didn't like the most was no longer on my plate. And for some people, that's bookkeeping, right? For example, they just dread doing their books every week, and it's like taking that off your plate. Yes, there's a financial impact in terms of you buying back your time, but it also might emotionally just get you more excited about growing the business too, because you're spending time on what you enjoy doing. So I think that's great. Now, just real quick, you mentioned working with someone in the Philippines. We work with a lot of VAs. Where did you find them? Like, how did you go about, or him or her, I guess, right? How did you source that individual? Any suggestions for folks that are looking to bring in somebody virtually?
Yeah, so the way I source my virtual assistants is I source them through a website, onlinejobs.ph, which specializes in people in the Philippines. And the way I normally do it is I'll post a job listing on there. And for being the virtual assistant industry is like one of the largest industries in the Philippines. So you get like hundreds of applications, right? So I'll put an application up. I literally get 200 applications. I'll whittle it down to around 5 or 10. Mostly, a lot of times, it has to do with like whether they're 100% verified because they're dealing with financial information. I want to make sure they're real, right? And then from there, I do an in-person interview, and then I give them a test project, usually something in that specialty. Like you said, you want to hire people who know that specialty. So if I'm hiring a virtual assistant who does bookkeeping, I want to hire somebody who only does bookkeeping, right? If I'm hiring a virtual assistant for social media, I want to hire somebody that only focuses on social media. So at that point, I give them a test project associated with their specialty, and I give all the 5 or 6 virtual assistants the same exact task. And then I compare apples to apples, and I primarily hire based on the quality of their work. And then from there, it's been a very effective strategy. I think I've hired 3 virtual assistants so far, and all have been absolute rock stars. So I highly recommend people use virtual assistants if they don't already. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Yeah, we also use onlinejobs.ph, and you're right. It's almost an overwhelming process, just hiring somebody through that platform because of the sheer volume of inbound applications you get, which is a good problem to have, right? You have the chance to speak with all kinds of different individuals, but it's very important to try and systematize that hiring process a little bit. Something that I'll shout out for those listening who may be interested in hiring somebody through that specific platform, or I guess in general through really any platform, whether it's you're putting up a gig on Upwork or something like that, and you're looking for virtual help to come through, and you're just managing a high volume of inbound applications, and then you want to best know how to work with somebody virtually. Onlinejobs.ph has I can't remember the name of the course, but it's kind of like an intro course to working with virtual assistants as it relates to hiring, as it relates to vetting, and then as it relates to ongoing management. It's like $99. It's like the best $99 you could just ever spend. And we just use that as a playbook. So quick plug for them. I have no affiliation, but it's just been a helpful resource for us. Lastly, I should have mentioned this to you when you were talking about how you're very active on social and how that's been a great channel for you. But I want to round it out here before we wrap up the show. And a lot of folks listening are like, I do like the idea of getting active on social. Everyone I know who's very active on social tells me that's the best thing to do, and they're doing all these deals and they're raising all this money. But a lot of people, I think the common reason that people don't start doing it, there's maybe 3 common reasons. One, it's just a lot of work. It just requires a lot of work, and people don't like doing a lot of work if they're not seeing the immediate results. And getting active on social is a long-term game. 2, maybe they're afraid to be active. They don't really like the idea of putting themselves out there. I think 3, which is a really common one that I hear, is like, I just don't even know what to talk about or post or do there. What do I say? Where do I start? Let's focus on that third one, right? That third kind of objection of people not knowing what content to share, not knowing what to talk about. What would be your suggestion to an investor that's maybe starting from zilch, right? They haven't done anything. They see the benefit. They're not afraid to do it. They're willing to put in the work. What do you suggest they talk about? What do you suggest they start with as it relates to producing content and starting to build their platform, tell their story, all that fun stuff?
So people invest in people they like, trust, and who are credible, right? So for you to be credible, you have to show that you're doing this day in and day out, right? So start showing what you're doing on a day-to-day basis from an investing standpoint. Show that unit you turn, show that listing, explain the numbers of that acquisition, explain the refinance proceeds, how you got all of your money back in this deal. If people see that day in and day out, they're going to want to invest with you, right? Another easy strategy, which I really like when it comes to social, is focusing on being guests on podcasts, right? It's a lot of work to create a podcast. It is an immense amount of work. However, you could be a guest on other people's podcasts and you can leverage all their hard work. They already went there and created the podcast. They already went there and got the audience, right? You can just go there, jump on, take an hour of your time, share your story. And then from there, you're doing a couple of different things, right? You can create, you can make it so people like and trust you, right? People can learn about you without you having to dedicate one-on-one time, right? Another thing is you can create a lot of social media content. Like you can have a virtual assistant cut up your podcast, right? And there you go. That's a week worth of content from one podcast, and you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? So those are some kind of easy tactics I recommend for people wanting to get involved in social media. But at the end of the day, it's like, as you and I both know, you get what you ask for, right? If you don't put it out in the world, if people don't know what you want, if people don't know what your goals are, it's not going to come into fruition. Your manifestation is not going to happen, right? And that's the hugest benefit of social media, is like telling the world what you want and people somehow deliver.
Yeah. No, the Gary V thing, right? The document, don't create, I think is probably the best advice anyone has ever given as it relates to being active on social as a business owner. Right. We're in the real estate sector, but that applies to any business, if you're running a business, you should be active online in some capacity. Because it is the easiest and most scalable way to sharing your message to all of the folks that you might want to work with. Right. And that's just a hard and fast rule. There's no debate. Anyone that's just hopped on social and then stayed consistent with it for a couple of years has probably seen results that are like, yep, all of the time I've invested has been worth it. I can't think of really anyone who's done that over a long time horizon and been like, I wasted my time over that period of time. That's just not something that people say. So I highly recommend. And as you mentioned, right, you have to stay authentic to who you are. You have to, because people invest and work with people they like. The easiest way to get people to like you is to not be fake, be authentic. Easiest way to get people to trust you and believe you're credible is to show what you're doing and display your expertise in the area that you invest, right? Whether it's geographic, asset class, property type, what have you. And the easiest way to do that is just show people what you're doing. Like the unit turn thing, as you mentioned, that crushes it on our Instagram page, just the before and afters. It's like the easiest social media content to ever create. Just take some pictures of that banged up apartment before you renovate it and take some pictures after, of the common hallway, of the exterior, of the roof replacement you're doing. You're putting in new windows. Why do you like this brand of windows? How much did it cost? Like all of that stuff is sitting there and it doesn't really add that much time to your day-to-day business, right? I mean, this is stuff that you're probably doing regardless, but you're just sharing it with other people and telling them what you're doing. So I think that's great. And again, my message to everyone, as I'm sure it is to you, as I'm sure similar to yours, is just do this at a small scale over time. Stay consistent. You'll see results. All right, Andrew, what are your plans for 2024? Any big goals here for this upcoming year? This episode will go live mid-January, I believe. So I think a lot of the folks listening got a full runway ahead of them. What are you looking to do this year?
So I'm looking to do a couple different things. So last year I closed on 100 units during one of the during a quote unquote recession where everybody else was scared. I was buying properties, and now interest rates coming down, it looks pretty smart. But during the time, it didn't feel smart. But
yeah, it felt scary.
It felt scary, but it's paying dividends right now. And at this point, I am closing. My goal is to close on 100 more units. I want to syndicate one deal. I want to flip one property and do two wholesale deals. That's kind of my goals for 2024 from a business perspective. From kind of a fun perspective, I do want to travel to around 10 different destinations this year. I'm going to Peru in January. I want to go to Hawaii. I want to go to the Caribbean. So I want to kind of enjoy some of the fruits of my labor that I've been working and grinding so hard for over the past 3 years.
Love it, man. No, it's great. Yeah, big goal of mine this year is to do a little bit more traveling as well. Did a decent amount this past year, but most of it domestic, hoping to get international a little bit more this year. So I resonate with that objective myself as well. But Andrew, this has been great. I think a lot of folks are going to have taken something away from this episode, whether it's the push to get active on social media, whether it's hiring some help, whether it's an 18-year-old person locally or somebody virtual in another part of the country, whether it's using HELOCs, second mortgages, how to put together JVs, probably helping some folks avoid some pitfalls as they put together that first syndication. So thank you for taking the time to chat. And if folks want to get in touch with you, reach out to you, follow you on all your social channels, where can they do so?
They can follow me at Investor Freed on Instagram or Andrew Freed on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I just want to leave your guests with one last piece of advice. And, honestly, it took me over a decade of the workforce to realize this, but to be successful as an entrepreneur, you can't be a perfectionist. You really have to focus on imperfect action because that always trumps perfection, right? So just remember, when you're really trying to grow and scale in real estate, the key is to do consistent day in and day out action and just fix it along the way, right? And then a year, 2 years later, you're going to have a perfect process, but it took many iterations along the way.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is not a quick game. If you're getting into this business, and I think fortunately a lot of the people listening to this are already in this business, but it's a constant reminder that you just have to love the process, right? You have to become divorced from the outcome in this business because you honestly can't really control it. You can't really control how many deals you see on an annual basis. It's not really up to you. You can do all the work required to put yourself in a position to see a lot of them, but ultimately that's a lot of that's kind of out of your control. You just have to love the day in and day out work of finding those investors, finding the deals, making sure that your buildings are full and people are paying. And if you do fall in love with that and you do commit to all of the actions required to keep all of that together, it's when you really start to stack those wins, you know. And we talked about it earlier in the show. You stack a few of those small wins, that leads to some more medium wins, and then you put yourself in a position to make those big leaps. But it's very hard to be in that position unless you've done all of that ahead of time. So I think that's a great closing message for everyone, especially early in the year. You know, I think this is going to be an episode that people get jacked up for as they start launching into 2024. So I think that's a great message. But to all the listeners, all the links in the show notes to Andrew's socials, everything that he just mentioned as it relates to how you can get in touch with him. And Andrew, thanks again for coming on the show, man. This is a great conversation.
Thank you so much.